For months, President Trump has flirted with taking military action in Cuba. Tensions may escalate further as sources tell CBS News that the Justice Department is weighing the prospect of an indictment against the country's former president, Raul Castro. The move connected to the deadly 1996 shoot-down of planes operated by a humanitarian group. 3 Americans and a U.S. resident were killed. The 94-year-old Castro formally stepped down in 2021, but is still largely viewed as a powerful figure on the island. CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins me now. Margaret, separate from the indictment, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, was in Cuba this week. As I mentioned at the top of the program, there is a concerted effort, diplomatic, economic, and now potentially judicial, to pressurize the regime. What did Ratcliffe go there to talk about?
They're trying to engineer not necessarily regime change, but to change the regime's behavior. And it's unlikely.
Behavior modification.
In a pretty significant way when you're trying to steer a communist system away from being a centralized economy. But that's what they're attempting. The CIA director, I'm told, really tried to emphasize when he was sitting across from Raul Castro's grandson, along with the intelligence chiefs, that they should look to the Venezuela model as one of cooperation also possible here with Cuba. Now, I'm told that really means basically they're trying to control the transition of the communist state and have them go in the direction America wants them to. Now, they're trying to push them into a corner here by putting financial pressure on the military and intelligence leaders with sanctions. They're also dangling here $100 million in humanitarian aid that they'll give to the Cuban people, not the state. But that would provide some relief, particularly given the protests that we are seeing due to the energy crisis, partially because of the U.S. cutting off the oil supply as well. But the goal here is really to shift direction without triggering the kind of collapse and humanitarian crisis that would send thousands of people onto Florida shores.
But this is a topic you discussed with former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, is it not?
I did, and a former CIA director himself.
Yes, indeed.
And
yes.
he was surprised at the unlikely messenger. But I did ask him, is Cuba actually a national security threat? Take a listen. The CIA director was just in Havana meeting with Raul Castro's grandson, along with the head of intelligence and the head of the minister of the interior. The U.S. is offering Cuba aid. They're pressing for political change and floating the potential of indicting 94-year-old Raul Castro, who's no longer in power, but he's clearly influential. Does it matter to U.S. national security what happens on this island?
I think that actually the biggest risk is that we end up with another Mariel evacuation from Cuba that has tens of thousands of Cubans heading to the United States out of desperation, as happened a number of years ago. So I think that's actually, at this point, the biggest threat. You know, the Cubans have had a lot of security people in Venezuela. They were formed a security cordon around Maduro. He didn't trust his own people. They've done this in other countries. So they have been involved in ways that impact our national security and our interests in their engagement in other countries for a long time. But are they an imminent threat to the United States? Other than in these, if you will, peripheral ways, I think the main threat is, frankly, is collapse.
Which the administration says they're trying to avoid.
Right.
This is part of the hemisphere-wide muscularity of the Trump administration, is it not?
It is, and this attempt to chase out China and Russia from, as they say, America's backyard, something we haven't fully seen happen yet in Venezuela, by the way. There's still a fair amount of Chinese and Russian investment there. But that's the stated intent by the Trump administration.
When you talk to administration officials, do they share any of what Gates talked about, this concern about a flood or even a small flood of refugees?
Yes, and that's something that I think is interesting because we have been hearing about the reporting around military planning, which would suggest something offensive. What I have heard more in the diplomatic space is military planning to prevent a collapse, to prevent the kind of crisis. Remember, that's a huge difference between Venezuela and Cuba, the proximity factor here. And so they don't want to trigger the kind of influx of refugees that, by the way, President Trump has tried to stop from entering America in the first place and made it much harder to claim asylum.
Great stuff, as always. Margaret Brennan,
Thank
you so very much. You can watch more of Margaret's interview with former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Robert Gates on Face the Nation this Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern on CBS.